I just had some friends reach out and ask if I could build them some basic storage shelves, and I thought this would be a great project to share with you. Now there are a few limitations for these shelves. First off, they need to be about 6 feet tall, and they need to fit through most doorways because they have to kind of fish them through this building to get it into the location they need. On top of that, they need to be heavy duty so they can put a bunch of stuff on them. To keep this project relatively inexpensive, I'm going to use 2x4s, which should give us plenty of strength and help keep the cost down. Plus, if I calculated this correctly, I should only need 10 of these to build this project. I'm going to first start off with building the shelves so that I can keep the dimensions within check. Now I believe I'll make them about 4 feet wide and about 2 feet deep, and that should go through most doorways really easily. I'm also going to make most of the cuts with a miter saw, but if you don't have a miter saw, that's okay. A circular saw should be able to do it if you're really careful. I plan to have a total of 4 shelves for this unit, and so I ended up cutting down 4 of our 2x4s into 4-foot sections. It's now time to cut out the sides for this, but I won't actually need to cut them at 24 inches because I have to take into consideration the thickness of our front and back. So this should be 3 inches, so I need to cut down several pieces at 21. Now that I have 8 of these 21-inch long sections for the sides, I can start assembling the shelves. But I do want to mention that I had a little bit of wood left over. So if you do this project, don't throw this out, and I'll show you why in a little bit. When building these shelves, I have 2 things I like to remember. First off, I need to make sure I'm on a flat surface so that everything can be square just from the beginning. And that way I don't have to worry about everything being a little bit twisted as I'm putting it together. Also, I'm going to assemble these upside down. So in other words, the rough sides, the sides that, well, you don't really see and maybe a little uneven when you're putting the tops on the shelves, you want those to face up so that way they won't interfere with anything else. It's also a good idea to have a square, like a corner square, so that you can fit in place and just double check and make sure everything is in alignment. And before I attach these together, I just used a simple clamp across them, just kind of squeeze everything together to keep them from moving around as I add the screws. I'm also pre-drilling each of these holes to help prevent cracking. Now that I have all the shelves put together, 3 of these are almost perfectly flat and 1 has a little bit of a twist to it. But that happens, especially with 2x4s. So my plan is to kind of make it one of the middle 2 shelves, and that way it won't be as noticeable, and I can kind of counteract everything else that's going on with the main shelves that are all nice and flat, and it should be nice and square to the floor. It's also a good idea to take a pencil and do an arrow in the direction of the top of your shelves so we don't get these mixed up as we move them around. Moving on to the legs, I'm going to need 4 of these at 6 feet or 72 inches. I'm just using a miter saw to cut them again. After getting our legs cut down, we had some boards left over, in fact 4 of them. Now these are just a little bit longer than the sides we put on the shelves earlier, so if I cut these down to 21 inches for each one and then situate them right in the middle of our shelves, that'll give a lot more strength to them as well. Plus, the topper that sits on top will be less likely to warp and bend over time. And then I'm going to put each of these right in the center of our shelf to give the most strength to each side. And now it's time to attach our legs to our shelf frame. In a lot of cases, you'll see people attach them to the inside of the frame of the shelves. I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to attach them to the outside of our shelf here, and that'll allow us to have a full board that you don't have to worry about cutting and trimming around our legs. Now, some people might tell you, hey, wait a minute, in that case, you're just working with the shear strength of the screws. And that is true. You don't have the boards supporting each other as well as it could be if it was on the inside. But I'm going to use 2 separate sets of screws, 2 that'll go into the sideboard and 2 that'll go into this end board or the front here, and that'll allow a total of 16 screws per shelf. Now I don't know what the exact shear strength of 16 screws is, but I'm pretty sure that whatever my friend puts on these shelves, I'm not too concerned about them giving out. At this point, I'm going to attach the top and the bottom together at the same time. And yes, that will make it a little bit more difficult to get the middle shelves in place. I'll probably have to tap them in with a mallet. But that's okay. By doing this, it's going to secure everything stays nice and square and rigid so I don't get it out of whack in the process of trying to install one of the lower shelves and it just messes it up. To install the other 2 shelves, at least to get them started, I'm going to leave this on its side. It's be a lot easier to get those initial screws in place without it trying to move around a lot. Now the spacing in between each of the shelves calculates out to about, if you want it even, about 19 1/3. well, you could always do 20, 19, and 19, and it comes out to the same number. So that's probably what I'm gonna do. Let's see if we can flip this thing over without creating too much destruction. Oh yeah, it's got some weight to it now. All right. That's a workout. Do you remember those 2 cutoffs I said to save and we'd use later? Well, now's that time. I'm actually going to cut off 4 pieces at 3.5 inches, and we're going to create feet for the bottom of all 4 corners. Now, if by chance your shelf is going to be sitting in a garage, maybe on a concrete floor, or anywhere where it could get wet on the bottom, instead of using the wood or the cutoffs, I strongly suggest getting some pressure treated wood and use those as the feet. Otherwise, these could prematurely rot. It's also a good idea to inset your screws just a little bit, at least 1/8 of an inch, so they don't scratch the floor and prematurely rust. I flipped the unit up onto its feet, so it's a little bit easier to work on the top of our shelves. Now for this material, a lot of people would use plywood or MDF or OSB. Plywood right now is still quite expensive. MDF, I'm a little concerned with. If it gets wet, it'll just swell. And so I think I'm gonna go with OSB. I've had good results with that in the past, and it's relatively inexpensive. 2 things to remember when you're working with OSB. There's usually a smooth side and a rough side. I had the smooth side facing up. I figured that'd be a little bit nicer for the shelves. And 2, there's usually some black writing somewhere on it. And this stuff, well, can easily get on about everything. So it's a good idea to either try and wipe that off or paint over it. And there we have it. This shelf is basically done. But watch. Look at that. All my weight, about 165, 170 pounds on one shelf. It didn't budge a bit. So this thing is very heavy duty and should be able to handle most stuff that you would ever put on it. Plus this is very upgradable. Imagine putting some pegboard right here on this side, and that'll give you a ton more storage to hang things up. Plus that'll give you a little added protection for stuff not to fall off the shelves. And you might also notice it can be a little bit dark under these shelves. So if you so desire, you could always put up some LEDs under each of these shelves that make them really easy to see what's on them, or if you just want to display something. And just in case you're wondering, that is how much scrap I had left over. So not only is this a heavy duty build, it's a very efficient build as well. Now if you enjoyed this project, you might want to check out this next one.